good to be with you again. This is the fourth Sunday of Easter, according to the Revised Common Lectionary. Some of you may be saying to yourself, as I said to myself when I was first exposed to the lectionary, what in the world is this? It's a guide to preaching. Well, don't we have an Easter Sunday? Why are we talking about the fourth Sunday after Easter? The reason is that Easter is such a pivotal event. It is the pivotal event for those of us who are followers of Christ. And one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, so what difference does it make to our lives, to you and to me, that Jesus came, died, and was raised from the dead? What difference does Easter make in our lives? The text is from the 10th chapter of John, verses 1 through 10. Some of you may be saying, and this is a very good question, why the fourth Sunday after Easter are we looking at a text in the 10th chapter of John, well before Jesus had died and was resurrected? What you and I need to remember is that the four Gospels, were not written down until a long time after Jesus' death. Mark, we think, the earliest gospel, written about 65, about 35 years after Jesus' death. John, what we believe to be the last gospel, that was written probably around 90 AD or CE. So what we are doing is we are looking at the things in our faith from the final word back through the story of Jesus. Easter becomes the lens through which we see everything in the gospel, even those things that happened before the resurrection. The last word is the best word. And the last word in the gospel is Jesus is alive. John, the 10th chapter, verses 1 through 10, is an interesting story about Jesus identifying himself as the gate. In John's gospel, there are 7 very important I am statements about Jesus. Many of us know, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Probably the one in the 10th chapter of John's gospel is the one we least know. I am the gate. The gate to what? The gate to green pastures. The gate inside in the protection of God. The gate that is opened in Jesus that allows the sheep to go out of the gate into the pastures that God has created. It's interesting that in this text, it is so important for us to look at this because we are living in a time when we so desperately need to find some way, some gate where we can go in and find provision and rest, and where we can go out and find comfort and hope. The problem is that you and I are living in a day when the church in many people's experience, is disappearing. It's not just that we had a pandemic, although that exacerbated what was going on. But frankly, you and I are living in a time, and we've been living in a time, when the church, in terms of numbers, in terms of attendance, in terms of the things that we usually identified as the metrics of effectiveness in the church, those are going down in many churches. And in the midst of that, we have to find something beyond ourselves. Because if I'm not right, this is going to continue with the church. Many of us grew up in what we would call a Christian nation. We are living in a post-Christian time. There are so many things to occupy the lives of people that those of us who are the ministers of Christ are going to have to be able to say, there's something deeper, there's something more profound than just how many are there, how much is given. Frederick Craddock, that great minister, wrote a book called As One Without Authority, and he pinpointed, he said, the church, ministers are losing their authority. Now, some people have misinterpreted that. He didn't mean that ministers in themselves are losing their authority, but he meant people are getting bored with the preaching of the church. They're tired, as they came in the 1950s and 1960s, to hear 3 points and a poem and the words of a song. They want something that is fresh and alive. They want to know that because Jesus is risen, that is going to make all of the difference in the world. The issue now is not for you and me simply to minister and to worship and to preach and to do what we have to do so that things can get bigger. But the issue is so that things can get better for the sake of Christ. I am the gate. Those words 7 times in the Gospel of John, ego eimi in the Greek, I am. Moses, when he was leading the people of Israel out of bondage, said to God, all right, I'm going to do this, but who am I going to tell sent me? And God responded, you just tell them, I am sent you. Yahweh. And every time we hear those words in the Gospel of John, so much a part of the Gospel of John, every time we hear I am, we're hearing Jesus is God. But folks, the pastures are not what they used to be. They're not as green as they used to be. We've done a good job of polluting the world that God gave us. We've done a good job of taking the wonderful gift of creation that God has made for us, and we've done an awful job of corrupting that world. We're now going out into pastures, frankly, that are not as green, but still demand the best commitment of the church to try to make things different. I remember one time I was coming back from Atlanta to Florida, where I was pastor at that point. And I sat next to a man and he said, "Do you know where I've been?" I said, "No, where have you been?" It was during the heyday of Atlantic City and all the gambling. Well, he had been up there gambling. He didn't know who I was. And he said, "I want to tell you about all the places in Atlantic City where you can go and where you can find the best hotels and the best food and the best places of gambling." I'm not going to get anybody in my church to give me that kind of information. So I'm hanging on every word. But I know what's going to happen. At some point, he's going to say, "What do you do for a living?" And I'll have to drop the bomb. "What do you do for a living?" he said. I said, "I'm a minister." And you could see on his face, out of all of the people that I could sit next to on this airplane, I'm next to a minister. But I thanked him. I said, "I would never get this information about Atlantic City unless you gave it to me." We are living in a world that demands for you and me to open the gate of Christ to people, to let people know that what the church is about, it is not about being the biggest. It is about being the best vehicle of God's truth to our world. I've come that you may have life and you may have it more abundantly. What does that mean? It means a lot of things, doesn't it? Henry Nouwen said, "What you and I need to do is to understand the first and foremost spiritual task is to realize that we are people loved unconditionally by God." Do you know, I think that's the abundant life, to know that. And if I can ever get that truth deeply into my life, if you and I can ever get that truth deeply into our lives, it will make all the difference. And we'll know the so what of Easter.